Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. Hey there, fellow mystery lovers. Before we dive into tonight's chilling tale, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. If you enjoy stories that keep you up at night wondering what's real and what's not, you're in the right place. Tonight's story explores how an ordinary small town was forever changed by one inexplicable event. I'd love to hear your theories in the comments below. Now, get comfortable, dim those lights, and prepare yourself for the disappearance that left a town in shock. I never believed in ghost stories until I became one. At least that's how it feels sometimes. When you're the only one who remembers something that apparently never happened. When an entire town looks at you like you've lost your mind. Well, maybe you start to wonder if they're right. My name is Ellie Mercer, and until 6 months ago, I was just another resident of Pinewood Creek, Virginia. Population 3,782. Or I should say 3,781 now. Let me take you back to where it all began. To the day my best friend vanished, and a town collectively agreed she never existed at all. It was October in Pinewood Creek. The kind of October that fills the air with that crisp, sweet scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. The mountains surrounding our little valley had exploded into a kaleidoscope of reds and golds. And Main Street was decorated with those corny scarecrows and hay bales that small towns can never seem to resist. I was working the morning shift at Ruby's Diner, same as I had every Saturday for the past 3 years. The breakfast rush had just died down, and I was refilling the napkin dispensers when the bell above the door jingled. Rebecca Marshall walked in, right on schedule. Her copper hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing that oversized green cardigan she practically lived in once the weather turned cold. "Coffee, black, and keep it coming," she said with a dramatic sigh as she slid onto her usual stool at the counter. I was up all night grading papers. Rebecca taught English at Pinewood High, the same school we'd both attended years ago. We'd been inseparable since 7th grade when she'd defended me against Tara Mitchell and her mean girl squad. I poured her coffee and slid it across to her. "You say that every Saturday, and yet you still assign essays every Friday. Glutton for punishment, I guess." She wrapped her hands around the mug and inhaled deeply. "Thanks, Elle. You're a lifesaver." We chatted as I finished my side work. About her students, about Mrs. Lancaster down the street who was convinced someone was stealing her garden gnomes, about the new horror series we'd both been binging. Normal, everyday stuff. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that suggested it would be the last conversation we'd ever have. Rebecca left around 10. Said she was heading to the grocery store and then planned to spend the afternoon reading on her porch since the weather was so nice. "Still on for movie night?" I asked as she gathered her things. "Wouldn't miss it," she replied, tossing a $5 bill on the counter, even though I always gave her the friends and family discount. "My place at 7, I'll order the pizza." That was the last time anyone in Pinewood Creek saw Rebecca Marshall. Or so I thought. When I showed up at her little blue craftsman house on Oak Street that evening, pizza had already been delivered. It sat on her porch, the box growing cold in the autumn chill. I knocked. No answer. I called her cell. It went straight to voicemail. I peered through windows. Her car was in the driveway. Her porch light was on, but no Rebecca. At first, I wasn't particularly concerned. Maybe she'd walked to the convenience store on the corner. Maybe she was out back in her small garden. Maybe she'd fallen asleep reading. But as 1 hour stretched into 2, concern bloomed into worry. I called our mutual friend, Sheriff Deputy Danny Whitaker. "She's probably just lost track of time," he said, but I could hear him grabbing his keys. "You know how she gets when she's deep in a book." 30 minutes later, Danny and I stood in Rebecca's empty living room. Her phone was on the coffee table. Her book lay open, face down on the armchair. A half-empty cup of tea sat beside it, stone cold. It looked for all the world like she had just stepped out of the room for a moment and would return any second. Except she didn't. And that's when things got strange. Really strange. The search for Rebecca Marshall never officially began, because according to everyone in Pinewood Creek, according to records and memories and sworn statements, Rebecca Marshall had never existed at all. When Danny called the station to report her missing, his captain had no idea who he was talking about. When I insisted we check her classroom at the school, the principal informed us that they'd never had a teacher by that name. When we went to her house the next morning, a family named the Johnsons answered the door, confused by our questions and insistent they'd lived there for the past 11 years. Rebecca's apartment was gone, her car was gone, her classroom was occupied by a different teacher. Her phone number belonged to someone in Arizona. Her social media accounts vanished. Her name appeared in no records, no databases, not even our high school yearbook where I clearly remembered her as most likely to change the world. Every trace of Rebecca Marshall had been erased, or had never existed to begin with. Except in my memories. Danny stopped returning my calls after a week. His expression had grown increasingly uncomfortable each time I mentioned her name. Even my parents gently suggested I might benefit from talking to someone. "Honey," my mother said carefully one evening, "I'm worried about you. You've been under a lot of stress at work lately. Maybe—" "I'm not making her up," I snapped, immediately regretting my tone when I saw her flinch. "Mom, Rebecca has been my best friend since middle school. You've had her over for dinner countless times. She brought you those lavender candles you loved for your birthday last year." My mother's face was a mask of concern and confusion. "Ellie, please. You've never brought a friend named Rebecca to this house. I think I would remember that." I stopped talking about Rebecca after that, at least to other people, but I didn't stop looking. I couldn't. How do you just accept that someone you've known for 15 years, someone you shared secrets and inside jokes and heartbreaks with, never actually existed? You don't. The rational part of my brain suggested all sorts of explanations. I was having some kind of mental breakdown. I'd somehow constructed an elaborate fantasy friend and convinced myself she was real. Maybe I had a brain tumor. Maybe I was in a coma somewhere dreaming all of this. But none of those explanations felt right, because I remembered Rebecca. I remembered specific details, specific moments. The scar on her left palm from when she fell off her bike in 8th grade. How she always ordered pepperoni and pineapple pizza, even though everyone teased her about it. The sound of her laugh. A little too loud, a little too abrupt, always genuine. You don't imagine that level of detail, do you? You don't dream up 15 years of friendship so vivid you can recall the smell of someone's shampoo, or the way they take their coffee, or how they always sneeze twice in a row. Never, just once. So, if I wasn't crazy, then what had happened to Rebecca Marshall? And more disturbingly, what had happened to everyone's memories of her? November slipped into December, and Pinewood Creek transformed itself for the holidays. Main Street twinkled with white lights, and the town square was dominated by a massive Christmas tree. Life went on as if nothing had changed, as if no one was missing. But I felt her absence like a phantom limb. At the diner, I still found myself turning to share a joke with someone who wasn't there. At home, I'd pick up my phone to text her about something I'd seen on TV, only to remember I had no one to send that text to. I'd taken to keeping a journal, documenting everything I could remember about Rebecca. Every detail, every memory, every conversation. It was partly to reassure myself that I wasn't crazy, and partly because I was terrified of forgetting her too. What if whatever had erased her from everyone else's memories eventually claimed mine as well? The thought kept me up at night. My apartment felt too quiet, too empty. sleep became elusive, and when it did come, my dreams were filled with fractured images of Rebecca, standing at the edge of the woods that bordered town, or calling my name from somewhere I couldn't reach. I threw myself into research, spending every free moment at the Pinewood Creek Public Library, combing through old newspapers and town records, searching for any mention of Rebecca or her family. That's where I met Marcus Chen, the new reference librarian. He'd only been in town for a few months, moving from Seattle after his father passed away. "You're here a lot," he observed one afternoon, catching me surrounded by stacks of local history books. "Working on a project?" I hesitated. I'd stopped talking about Rebecca to anyone in town, tired of the pitying looks, the gentle suggestions that I seek professional help. But Marcus was new. He hadn't been around when Rebecca disappeared. He hadn't witnessed my increasingly desperate attempts to prove she'd existed. "Research," I answered vaguely, expecting him to nod and move on. Instead, he pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. "Anything I can help with? I'm pretty good at digging up obscure information. It's kind of my superpower." Something about his earnest expression and the way he didn't seem to be judging me made me take a chance. "What if I told you someone disappeared from this town?" I said slowly, measuring my words. "But not just physically disappeared. I mean, completely disappeared, like they never existed in the first place." I expected a laugh, a raised eyebrow, a subtle shift in expression that meant he was mentally backing away from the crazy person. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, lowered his voice, and asked, "Who disappeared?" The question, so simple and direct, accepting the premise of my inquiry without question, nearly undid me. I hadn't realized how desperately I needed someone to believe me until that moment. "My best friend," I whispered, fighting back unexpected tears. "Rebecca Marshall." Marcus didn't say much that first day, just listened as I gave him the outline of what had happened. He didn't offer theories or platitudes. He just asked careful questions and took notes in a small, leather-bound notebook. "I'll see what I can find," was all he promised before our conversation was interrupted by a group of high school students needing help with research papers. I left the library feeling lighter than I had in weeks, just from having someone listen without immediately assuming I was delusional. The next day, there was a note waiting for me at Ruby's Diner. Plain white envelope, my name written in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a single slip of paper with an address in the neighboring town of Millfield and a time. 7 p.m. Below that, just the initials. MC. I debated whether to go. It could be nothing, or worse than nothing, it could be dangerous. But curiosity and desperation are powerful motivators. At 6:45, I pulled into the parking lot of the Millfield Community Center, a low brick building that had seen better days. Marcus was waiting by the entrance, hands in the pockets of his navy peacoat. "Thanks for coming," he said, holding the door open for me. I thought it might be better to talk outside of Pinewood Creek. He led me down a hallway to a small meeting room, where a dozen or so folding chairs were arranged in a circle. Most were already occupied, by men and women of varying ages, all of whom looked up when we entered. "Everyone," Marcus said, "this is Ellie Mercer. Ellie, this is, well, I guess you could call us the Forgotten Ones support group." For a moment, I couldn't process what he was saying. Then a woman about my age with dark hair and tired eyes spoke up. "Who did you lose?" she asked simply. And just like that, I understood. These people, they were like me. They all remembered someone that the rest of the world had forgotten. I sank into an empty chair, feeling like my legs might give out. "My best friend," I managed to say. "Rebecca." The woman nodded. "My husband, 3 years ago. One day he was there, and the next, it was like we'd never been married. The house was in just my name, no wedding photos. No one remembered our wedding. One by one, they shared their stories. A teenage boy who'd lost his twin sister, an elderly man whose wife of 40 years had been erased, a middle-aged woman whose son had vanished from memory, if not from her heart. All from different towns in the region, all with the same impossible story, all labeled as mentally ill or attention-seeking by those around them. "It's been happening for decades," Marcus explained after everyone had spoken. "Possibly longer. I started tracking the cases after my mother disappeared 3 years ago." "But why?" I asked, the question that had been haunting me for months. What's causing it? And why these specific people? The room fell silent. Finally, the elderly man, Thomas, he'd introduced himself as, spoke up. "We don't know why," he said gently, "but we've noticed patterns. It always happens in small towns in this region. The disappearances seem to cluster around certain times of year, mostly fall and early winter. And there's something else," the dark-haired woman, Sarah, added. "We've all had dreams of our missing loved ones in the woods." A chill ran down my spine. My dreams of Rebecca standing at the forest's edge suddenly took on new significance. "The forest that surrounds the valley," Marcus confirmed. "It appears in everyone's dreams. Sometimes the missing person is standing at its edge. Sometimes they're walking between the trees. Sometimes they're trying to communicate from within it." "It's just dreams," Thomas cautioned, seeing my expression. "We don't have any evidence that—" "I have evidence," the teenage boy interrupted. "Jason," I remembered. He couldn't have been more than 17. "I found my sister's bracelet." All eyes turned to him. "I've been going into the forest," he admitted, not meeting anyone's gaze. "Looking for Leah. Last week I found her bracelet, the one I gave her for our 16th birthday, caught on a branch about 2 miles in. It wasn't there before. I've searched that same area dozens of times." The room erupted into murmurs. Some voices excited, others concerned. "Jason, we've talked about this," Marcus said firmly. "It's not safe to go into those woods alone, especially with winter coming on." "But what if they're there?" Jason insisted, his voice cracking with emotion. "What if they're all there somehow, trapped or something? Shouldn't we try to find them?" The question hung in the air. I found myself holding my breath, because part of me, a growing part, wanted to grab a flashlight and head into the forest right that minute. "If people are truly being removed from reality somehow," Sarah said carefully, "then whatever is doing it is beyond our understanding. We need to be careful, strategic. We need more information," Marcus agreed. "That's why we meet, to pool what we know, to look for patterns, to support each other." For the next hour, they brought me up to speed on what they'd learned. It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd had that morning. More importantly, I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't crazy. Something impossible was happening, and these people were experiencing it too. As we prepared to leave, Marcus pulled me aside. "There's something else you should know," he said, his voice low. "Something we don't talk about in the group because it would just create panic." The seriousness in his expression made my stomach tighten. "What is it?" "Sometimes, the people who remember, they disappear too. Winter descended on Pinewood Creek with a vengeance that year. Snowstorms buried the valley in drifts that reached the windowsills, and temperatures plummeted to record lows. The forest that encircled our town looked forbidding, the leafless trees like skeletal fingers clawing at the gray sky. After the meeting in Millfield, I couldn't stop thinking about what Marcus had said. People who remembered sometimes disappeared too. Was that my fate? To be erased from existence like Rebecca? The thought should have terrified me. But there was a part of me, a part I wasn't proud of, that almost welcomed it. At least then I might find out what had happened to her. At least then I wouldn't be left behind with these memories that no one else shared. I continued attending the Forgotten Ones meetings, driving through snow and ice to reach Millfield every Tuesday night. They became my anchor in a world that increasingly felt unmoored from reality. We were careful, meeting in different locations each time, using coded language in any written communications. Marcus's warning about those who remembered disappearing had made us all paranoid, though about what or whom none of us could say. It was at one of these meetings, in the back room of a coffee shop closed for the evening, that we first began to piece together something substantial. "I've been mapping the disappearances," Marcus announced, unrolling a large paper on the table we'd gathered around. It was a detailed map of the region, with red pins marking various towns. "Each pin represents a disappearance that fits our pattern," he explained. "Someone completely erased from records and memories except for one or two people who remember them." The pins formed a rough circle, with a familiar area at its center. "The Pinewood Forest," Sarah whispered, voicing what we were all seeing. "I think whatever is happening, it's emanating from somewhere in these woods," Marcus said. "And I think it's been happening for generations." He produced a stack of papers, photocopies of old newspaper articles, town records, hospital reports. I found references dating back to the 1920s. Cases of mass delusion, where a single person insisted someone had existed who clearly hadn't. Cases of people being institutionalized for persistent shared hallucinations about missing family members. We passed the papers around, a growing sense of dread building as we recognized our own stories reflected in these yellowed accounts from the past. "But what is it?" Jason asked, the frustration clear in his voice. "Some kind of... what? Monster? Government experiment? Alien abduction? Whatever it is," Thomas said grimly. "It's been operating right under everyone's noses for a century at least." That night, driving back to Pinewood through swirling snow, I made an impulsive decision. I turned off Main Street onto the narrow road that led to Rebecca's old house, the house now occupied by the Johnsons. I killed my headlights as I approached, parking a little way down the street. The house was dark except for a porch light and a faint blue glow of a television in what had once been Rebecca's living room. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe just to reassure myself that I hadn't imagined the layout of her home, the color of her front door, the arrangement of her garden now buried under snow. But as I sat there, shivering despite my car's heater, I noticed something odd. A flicker of movement at the edge of the property, where the manicured lawn gave way to the encroaching forest. I squinted through the falling snow, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing between two pine trees. A figure with copper hair wearing a green cardigan. My heart nearly stopped. "Rebecca?" I whispered, though there was no way she could hear me from inside my car. The figure turned, and even through the darkness and the snow I could swear our eyes met. Then, deliberately, she raised her hand and beckoned to me before turning and walking deeper into the trees. I was out of my car in an instant, stumbling through snow that reached my knees, calling her name. But by the time I reached the edge of the forest, there was nothing to see but darkness and swirling white. I stood there until my feet went numb and my hair was heavy with snow, staring into the impenetrable blackness of the woods, wondering if I'd finally cracked under the strain of it all. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Instead of serving coffee at Ruby's, I drove to the library, nearly empty on a weekday morning in the dead of winter. Marcus was shelving books in the reference section. He looked surprised to see me, but one glance at my face told him something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, guiding me to a quiet corner. I told him about what I'd seen, or thought I'd seen, the night before. "You can't go into those woods alone, Ellie," he said when I'd finished. "Even if it was Rebecca, even if she is somehow in there, it's too dangerous. I have to find her," I insisted. "If there's even a chance..." "We'll find her," he interrupted. But we do it together, prepared, not on impulse in the middle of a snowstorm. He was right, of course, but the image of Rebecca beckoning to me haunted my thoughts. What if she needed help now? What if she was trying to reach out to me specifically? When Marcus went to help a patron, I slipped into the local history section, pulling out books on Pinewood Forest. Most were fairly standard fare: flora and fauna catalogs, hiking guides, conservation reports. But one slim volume caught my attention. Whispers Among the Pines, Folklore of the Eastern Forests. The table of contents included a chapter on Pinewood. I flipped to it, scanning the pages of local legends. Most were the kind of stories you'd expect: ghostly hitchhikers, phantom lights, the usual campfire tales. But one short paragraph near the end made my blood run cold. Perhaps the most persistent legend of Pinewood Forest involves the Collector, an entity said to dwell deep within the oldest part of the woods. According to local lore, the Collector takes not only lives but identities, erasing victims from memory and history, leaving only a single witness to remember the taken person. The purpose of this selective memory is unknown, though some versions of the tale suggest it feeds on the witness's grief and confusion. I read the paragraph 3 times, my hands shaking worse with each reading. It was just a folk tale, I told myself. A coincidence, but the description was too perfect, too similar to what we were experiencing to be mere chance. I checked out the book, slipping it into my bag before Marcus could see what I was reading. I knew what he'd say, that I was grasping at straws, that folklore wasn't evidence. But I also knew I'd be returning to the edge of Rebecca's property that night, and the night after, if necessary, waiting for another glimpse of my friend. And if she beckoned again, folklore or not, warnings or not, I would follow. Because after months of doubting my own sanity, after months of second-guessing every memory I had of Rebecca, the possibility that she might still exist somewhere was too powerful to resist, even if that somewhere was a place people weren't meant to return from. The week that followed was the coldest in Pinewood Creek's recorded history. Pipes froze, schools closed, and most people stayed huddled in their homes, emerging only when absolutely necessary. It was the perfect cover for what I was planning. Each night after my shift at Ruby's, I parked near the Johnsons' house and watched the edge of the forest. Each night I waited for hours in the bitter cold, hoping for another glimpse of Rebecca. On the 4th night, my patience was rewarded. The snowfall had finally stopped, leaving the world eerily silent and crystalline under a waning moon. Around midnight, as I was fighting to keep my eyes open, movement at the forest's edge caught my attention. Rebecca stood there, clear as day despite the darkness. She was exactly as I remembered her, copper hair gleaming in the moonlight, that green cardigan hanging loose on her frame. But something was different. Her eyes, they seemed darker, deeper somehow, and she moved with a strange, fluid grace that didn't match my memories of her slightly awkward gait. Once again, she raised her hand and beckoned to me, then turned and walked into the trees. This time, I'd come prepared. Hiking boots, warm layers, flashlight, compass, the small butterfly knife Rebecca had given me years ago for self-defense, and a fully charged phone with the location sharing feature turned on. I texted Marcus earlier, giving him vague details of my plan. If I didn't check in by morning, he'd know where to look. I followed her into the forest, my flashlight beam bouncing off snow-laden branches, creating disorienting patterns of light and shadow. For someone allegedly on foot in deep snow, Rebecca moved quickly, always staying just at the edge of my vision, just far enough ahead that I couldn't catch up. "Rebecca!" I called several times, but she never responded, never even looked back. I don't know how long I walked. Time seemed to function differently among the trees. What felt like minutes might have been hours. The moonlight filtering through the canopy cast blue-white patterns on the snow, making the forest look more like an underwater world than a terrestrial one. The cold bit at my face, my hands, but I barely noticed. All my focus was on that figure ahead of me, leading me deeper and deeper into the woods. Eventually, we came to a clearing, a perfect circle of open space surrounded by ancient pines. Rebecca stood in its center, and for the first time, she turned fully toward me. Rebecca. My voice sounded wrong, too loud, too harsh in the perfect silence of the clearing. "Hello, Ellie." Her voice was Rebecca's, and yet not quite. It held an echo, a resonance that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "What happened to you?" I asked, taking a cautious step forward. "Where have you been? Why doesn't anyone remember you?" Something flitted across her face, an expression I couldn't read. "Do you like it here, Ellie, in Pinewood Creek?" The non sequitur threw me. "What?" I guess. "It's home." "Home," she repeated, as if testing the word. "Yes, it's been my home too for a very long time." A sense of wrongness crept over me. This conversation wasn't going the way it should. The Rebecca I knew would have been full of explanations, questions of her own, emotions. "Rebecca, you're scaring me," I admitted. "What's going on? What is this place?" She smiled then, and it was Rebecca's smile, the one I'd seen thousands of times over the years. But it didn't reach her eyes, which remained dark and fathomless. "You always were perceptive," she said, "more so than the others. That's why I chose you." "Chose me?" I repeated, taking an involuntary step back. "What are you talking about?" "To remember," she said simply. "To keep Rebecca Marshall alive in memory, if nowhere else." A chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold swept through me. "You're not Rebecca," I whispered. The thing wearing my best friend's face smiled wider. "No. And yes, I am what remains of her. I am what remains of all of them." My mind raced back to the folklore book, the collector, the entity that took not just lives but identities. That fed on grief and confusion. "What are you?" I demanded, my hand slipping into my pocket, fingers closing around the butterfly knife. "I have been called many things over the centuries," it said, moving toward me with that too fluid grace. "The collector is as good a name as any, though I prefer to think of myself as a preserver." "You've been taking people," I said, backing away, "erasing them." "Not erasing," it corrected, sounding almost offended. "Preserving. Humans are such fragile, temporary things. Your lives are so brief. Your memories die with you. I give the ones I take a kind of immortality, by making everyone forget them." I was still backing away, but the thing with Rebecca's face kept pace effortlessly. "By absorbing them," it said. "Their memories, their personalities, their essence. They become part of me, part of something ancient and enduring." It gestured around at the forest. "This place has stood for thousands of years. It will stand for thousands more. And so will they through me." Horror dawned as I realized what it was saying. "You're what? Feeding on them?" "Such a crude way to put it," it sighed, Rebecca's familiar features twisting into an expression of distaste. "I prefer to think of it as collecting, curating, and soon you'll join my collection too, just like dear Rebecca." It lunged forward with inhuman speed, and I fumbled with the knife, barely managing to open it before the creature was upon me. There was a struggle, chaotic, desperate. I felt its cold hands on my throat. Saw Rebecca's face inches from mine, contorted with an inhuman hunger. I slashed wildly with the knife, and felt it connect. Heard a strange hissing sound as the blade drew a line across the thing's forearm. It recoiled, the wound leaking something dark that steamed in the cold air. Not blood, something older, more viscous. Iron, it spat, looking at the wound with genuine surprise. You brought iron into my forest. The butterfly knife had been a gift from Rebecca on my 21st birthday, a vintage piece she'd found at an antique store. Old steel, she'd told me, the real deal, not that stainless crap they make now. I brandished the knife before me, and the creature wearing Rebecca's face took a step back. You can't have me, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. And you can't have Rebecca. You need to let her go. It laughed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. Let her go? She is part of me now. They all are, all the forgotten ones. Then I'll make people remember, I threatened. I'll tell everyone what you are, what you've been doing. They won't believe you, it said confidently. They never do. Why do you think I leave one person with memories intact? The witness is always dismissed as delusional, always isolated, always driven to despair, until they too come seeking answers in my forest. Its smile widened. Just as you have. It was right. Who would believe me? Even with the support group, even with Marcus, we had no proof. No way to convince the world that people were being erased from reality by some ancient entity in the woods. But as I stood there, knife extended, an idea formed. You feed on grief and confusion, I said slowly. On the witness's pain. Something in its expression confirmed my theory. What happens if the witness stops grieving, I asked. What happens if they accept the loss and move on? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across its stolen features. You need us to remember, I pressed. To suffer, to obsess, that's the real reason you leave one person with their memories intact. It's not just about driving us to despair. It's about feeding on our emotional connection to the person you took. The creature's expression hardened. Clever girl, but it doesn't matter. No one ever truly lets go of someone they've lost so completely. The grief may change shape, but it never dies. It sustains me, just as your grief for Rebecca has sustained me these past months. Then, I'll have to kill you, I said, though I had no idea if such a thing was possible. It laughed again, but the sound was hollow. With that little knife? I am as old as these woods, girl. I cannot be destroyed by one human with a sliver of iron. We stood at an impasse, me with my pathetic weapon, it with its ancient power. In the silence that stretched between us, I became aware of a faint sound in the distance. Voices, calling my name. The creature heard it too, its head snapping up like a predator sensing danger. You brought others to my forest? It hissed, rage contorting Rebecca's familiar features into something monstrous. I hadn't, not intentionally, but I'd shared my location with Marcus. I'd told him my plan, and apparently he'd brought reinforcements. Ellie! The voices were closer now, multiple voices. Marcus, Sarah, Jason, and others I didn't recognize. Here! I shouted, keeping my eyes and knife trained on the creature. I'm here! The thing with Rebecca's face snarled, looking torn between finishing what it had started with me and retreating from the approaching group. This isn't over, it said finally, backing toward the trees at the edge of the clearing. You'll be back. They always come back. Then it was gone, melting into the shadows between the ancient pines. Moments later, flashlight beams cut through the darkness, and Marcus burst into the clearing, followed by Sarah, Jason, Thomas, and several other members of the Forgotten Ones group. Ellie, are you okay? Marcus rushed to my side, his face tight with concern. I nodded, unable to find words as the adrenaline drained from my system, leaving me shaky and cold. Did you see it? Sarah asked urgently. Did you find out what happened to them? I looked at their faces, all these people who had lost someone, who carried the burden of remembering those that the world had forgotten, who had been feeding the thing in the forest with their grief and desperation without even knowing it. I saw it, I confirmed, my voice barely above a whisper, "and I know what we have to do." So that's why I'm telling this story now, not just to you who are listening, but to anyone who will hear it. Story number 2. Have you ever had that feeling? That inexplicable sense that something was watching you from the darkest corner of your room? That prickling sensation on the back of your neck when you're home alone, convincing you that maybe, just maybe, you aren't actually alone at all? Well, I never believed in those things, until I moved into the old Victorian on Maple Street. What I discovered behind that hidden door changed everything I thought I knew about reality, the terror I experienced. I still can't sleep with the lights off. If you're listening to this in bed right now, you might want to reconsider. This isn't just another ghost story. This is my warning to you, because what happened to me could happen to anyone who ignores the signs. The story begins now. I never planned to buy a haunted house. Not that the realtor used that word, haunted, isn't exactly a selling point in the Massachusetts housing market. Instead, she called it historic and full of character, with an unbeatable price for the square footage. After my divorce last year, I was desperate for a fresh start, somewhere far from the busy streets of Boston where every corner held memories of my failed marriage. The house on Maple Street seemed perfect on paper. Built in 1887, 3 stories of Victorian architecture with original hardwood floors, stained glass windows, and a wraparound porch that reminded me of my grandmother's home in rural Vermont. The online listing showed rooms flooded with sunlight, highlighting the ornate crown molding and the marble fireplace in what would become my living room. Reality, as it often does, presented a slightly different picture when I arrived for the viewing. "It needs some TLC, Jenny," my realtor said as we stood on the cracked walkway, looking up at the imposing 3-story Victorian. "But the bones are good." The early October wind whistled through the massive oak trees that flanked the property, their gnarled branches casting spidery shadows across the faded blue siding. A wind chime, hanging from the porch, rang out with an off-key melody that sent a chill down my spine. Dead leaves skittered across the wide wooden porch boards, collecting in corners and against the peeling front door. The house loomed above us, its many windows like watchful eyes. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw movement behind one of the third-floor windows, just a flicker of something passing by the glass. But that was impossible. The house had been vacant for months. "It's been vacant for almost 2 years now," Jenny continued. "The previous owners, the Caldwells, moved out quite suddenly. Family emergency, I heard." She didn't meet my eyes when she said this. I should have asked more questions, but something about the place captivated me from the moment I saw it, like it was calling to me. "I'll take it," I said, before we'd even finished the tour. The first night was magical. The creaks and groans of the old house felt charming, like a conversation between wooden beams that had stood for over a century. "Just you and me now, house," I said aloud, raising my glass of cheap champagne in a toast. The words echoed slightly, lingering a moment too long in the air. It wasn't until the 3rd night that I started to notice things. A door I was certain I'd closed would be open in the morning. My coffee mug would be in a different spot than where I'd left it. The thermostat would be turned down to 62 degrees, though I always set it at 68 before bed. At first, I dismissed these occurrences. I was stressed from the move, distracted by unpacking and the pressure of my remote job that barely afforded me the mortgage payments. Maybe I was more forgetful than I realized. But then the photograph happened. I'd placed a framed photo of my parents on the mantelpiece, the only personal touch in the otherwise sparse living room. One morning, I found it face down on the hardwood floor, the glass cracked in a spiderweb pattern. A strange thing was, it had been placed nearly 12 inches from the edge of the mantel. It couldn't have simply fallen. Then came the sounds. The footsteps on the 3rd floor. Light, deliberate steps moving from one end to the other, always around 3:17 a.m. I checked the time on my phone each night I bolted awake, heart pounding. Always 3:17. The footsteps would continue for exactly 4 minutes before stopping abruptly, as if whoever, or whatever, was walking had simply vanished mid-stride. I tried to rationalize it. Old houses settled, pipes expanded and contracted. Maybe there were raccoons in the attic. I even set up my phone to record the sounds one night. But when I played back the recording the next morning, there was nothing. Just static and the occasional creak that any house makes at night. As October turned to November, I adopted a cat from the local shelter, a sleek black rescue I named Salem. He became my constant companion, following me from room to room during the day. But at night, he would sit motionless in doorways, staring into empty corners with his tail puffed out, occasionally making low sounds in his throat that weren't quite meows. "What do you see, buddy?" I'd ask him, trying to sound casual while my stomach twisted with dread. He never answered, of course, just stared and stared at nothing I could perceive. It was Salem who found the door first. I was in the kitchen making dinner when I heard an insistent scratching sound. Following it, I found Salem pawing at the wood paneling in the hallway between the kitchen and what had once been a servant's staircase. "Salem, stop that. You'll damage the wood." I bent to scoop him up, but paused when I noticed what had captured his attention. There, partially hidden by a vintage coat rack, was an irregularity in the paneling. A thin, almost imperceptible seam in the otherwise seamless wall. I pushed the coat rack aside and ran my fingers along the seam. It formed a rectangle about 5 feet high and 3 feet wide. A door? But there was no handle, no visible way to open it. The next day, I went to the local hardware store and returned with a putty knife and small pry bar. After several attempts, I heard a faint click. The panel popped open a few inches, releasing a waft of stale, cold air that made me recoil. Salem hissed and bolted from the hallway. I pulled the door open wider, revealing darkness beyond. I used my phone's flashlight to illuminate what appeared to be a narrow staircase leading down. Not to the basement I already knew, this would be beneath a different part of the house. The stairs were crude, unfinished wood that looked far older than the rest of the home's architecture. I took the first step down, and the wood creaked beneath my weight. The air grew colder with each step, musty with an underlying scent I couldn't identify. When I reached the bottom, I swept the beam around slowly. It was a room roughly 15 feet square with stone walls. The floor was packed earth, and there was a strange symbol drawn in what looked like white chalk in the center. Around the edges of the room sat peculiar objects: glass jars with unidentifiable contents, bundles of dried herbs hanging from small hooks in the ceiling, and what appeared to be animal bones arranged in patterns. But what caught and held my attention was the far wall. There, scratched directly into the stone in crude, desperate strokes, were words: "Do not speak its name." And below that, "It listens." I backed up toward the stairs, unwilling to turn my back on the room. That's when I heard it. A soft shuffling sound from the darkest corner, where my phone's light didn't quite reach. A gentle scraping, like fingernails on stone, and breathing, slow and deliberate. I ran. I took the stairs 2 at a time, stumbling once and barking my shin painfully against the rough wood. I didn't stop until I was back in the hallway, slamming the hidden door shut. That night, the footsteps above my bedroom weren't just on the 3rd floor anymore. They were everywhere. And they weren't walking aimlessly, they were searching. I lay paralyzed under my blankets, barely breathing, as the footsteps moved methodically through the house. First on the 3rd floor, then down the main staircase, each step causing the ancient wood to groan in protest. The sound paused at the 2nd floor landing, directly above my bedroom. Then, with deliberate slowness, the footsteps continued down the hallway, trying each door. I could hear the soft click of doorknobs turning, the whisper of hinges as doors opened and closed. All the while, the temperature in my room plummeted. My breath formed visible clouds in the darkness, and my fingertips grew numb despite being tucked beneath my comforter. The digital clock on my nightstand flashed 3:17, then 3:18, then 3:19. Each minute stretching into what felt like hours. The footsteps reached the top of the servants' stairs, the narrow staircase that led directly down to the hallway with the hidden door. There was a long pause, and then the sound of something, descending those stairs with careful precision. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The footsteps weren't just sounds anymore. I could feel them reverberating through the structure of the house, through the mattress beneath me, through my own bones. The next day, I visited Martin Green, the town historian, seeking answers about my house's past. "The Ward House," he said, nodding thoughtfully after I explained my interest. "There's always been, well, rumors, local stories passed down." "What kind of rumors?" I asked. Before the town was properly established, that area was used by a small religious sect. They believed that certain locations were thin spots between our world and somewhere else. They called themselves the Watchers at the Threshold. A chill ran through me. And then Elijah Ward built his house there decades later? Yes, but during construction the workers reportedly uncovered some sort of underground chamber. There were incidents. 2 workers refused to return to the site. Another suffered what they called a nervous episode and was institutionalized briefly. Martin showed me an old newspaper clipping from 1888, a year after the house was completed. It mentions that Ward had become interested in occult studies, something completely out of character for a man previously known for his practical nature. What about his later years? The Ward family became increasingly reclusive. Servants reported strange noises in the house, objects moving on their own. The youngest daughter, Abigail, reportedly spoke of the whispering man who lived in the walls. He paused. Elijah was found dead in the house in 1926. His journal was found beside him. The doctor who examined the body reportedly told his wife that the last entry simply read, "It knows my name now." My blood ran cold. I thought of the warning scratched into the stone wall. "Do not speak its name. It listens." That evening, I returned to the hidden room with a proper flashlight. In the corner farthest from the stairs, partially hidden behind a rotting wooden shelf, I found a small leather-bound book. The handwriting inside was cramped and hurried. The ink faded to a rusty brown. The first entry was dated September 4th, 1888. "I have made a terrible mistake. The chamber should have remained sealed. What we found beneath the earth is not dead, merely dormant. It has been 3 nights since I first heard the whispering. E refuses to acknowledge the sounds, says it is merely the house settling. But a house does not speak one's name in the darkness." I turned to the page with trembling fingers. September 10th, 1888. I find myself waking precisely at 3:17 each morning, terrified and certain I am not alone in my room. My heart hammered against my ribs. 3:17. The exact time I'd been waking to the sound of footsteps. As I reached the bottom step to leave, my flashlight flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The darkness was absolute. And then I heard it. A soft, rasping whisper coming from the corner of the room. Something was saying my name. Over and over, "Emma, Emma, Emma." I ran blindly up the stairs, one hand on the wall to guide me, the other clutching the journal. I burst through the doorway into the hallway, slamming the hidden door shut behind me. Salem sat in the middle of the hallway, watching me with unblinking yellow eyes. Behind him, at the end of the hall, a shadow moved, just for an instant. A tall, thin silhouette that disappeared into the darkness of the living room. I was no longer alone in my house. Perhaps I never had been. The next day I visited Alice Caldwell, the previous owner. She answered on the 3rd knock, her eyes widening when I introduced myself as the new owner of her former home. "I don't talk about that house," she said flatly. "Please," I said desperately. "I found something. A hidden room and a journal. Strange things are happening." She reluctantly invited me in. As I told her everything, the color drained from her face. "We never found the room," she said. "But everything else, the footsteps, the whispering, objects moving. It started small for us too. We lived there for 16 months. By the end, my husband was sleeping in his car some nights." She rolled up her sleeve, revealing 4 parallel scars on her forearm that looked disturbingly like claw marks. "I woke up one night to find something sitting on my chest," she whispered. "I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I felt these being carved into my skin, but there was nothing visible doing it. Just pressure and pain and this overwhelming sense of hunger, not for food, for something else." We left the next day, walked away from our furniture, our belongings, everything. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "You need to leave that place. Now. That thing in the house, it feeds on attention, on acknowledgement. The more you interact with it, the stronger it gets." I returned home as the sun was setting, determined to gather Salem and some essentials. But when I reached the small bedroom at the end of the hallway, I found the door closed. Something scratched lightly at the door from the inside. "Salem?" I said, turning the knob and pushing the door open. The room beyond was dark. The scratching sound came from the direction of the closet. I crossed the room and pulled the closet door open in one quick motion. It was empty, but the scratching continued, now coming from behind me. I turned slowly. There, on the wall opposite the closet, words were appearing, being scratched into the wallpaper by invisible claws. HELLOEMMAIFOUNDYOURCATDOYOUWANTTOSEEHIM. "No," I whispered, backing away. I ran for the stairs, only to find Salem sitting calmly on the bottom step. I scooped him up and ran for the front door. The door refused to open. Behind me, throughout the house, I heard doors opening and closing, coming closer. In the hallway, the hidden door creaked slowly open, though no one was there to pull it. A cold draft emanated from the darkness beyond. And then the whispering began. "Emma, Emma, come down. We've been waiting so long." "Leave me alone," I said, my voice cracking with fear. A low chuckle rolled through the house. The temperature dropped sharply. "We can't leave you alone, Emma. You opened the door, you spoke our name." Something cold and solid closed around my wrist, fingers, but too long, too thin to be human. As the entity drew closer, a strange smell filled the room. Burning sage and something metallic. A new voice cut through the whispering, stern and commanding, speaking words in a language I didn't recognize. Light bloomed suddenly, the warm glow of flames. A woman stood in the doorway holding what appeared to be a bundle of burning herbs. "Get away from her," she ordered, not addressing me, but whatever invisible force had been about to claim me. The cold presence recoiled with a hiss of fury. The woman stepped forward, swinging the burning bundle in wide arcs. "Can you walk?" she asked. "Yes," I croaked. "Then move, now, stay behind me, don't run, don't speak." We moved toward the front door, which swung open as we approached. Outside, the night sky was clear, stars visible between the branches of the oak trees. "Go," she urged. "I'll hold it here." "Who are you?" I asked. "Agnes," she replied. "I've been watching this house for decades. I felt the barrier break when you found the hidden room. I should have come sooner." She pushed me toward the door. "I can't hold it back for long. You must leave now." 3 days later, I returned to find Agnes waiting for me on the porch. "I managed to bind it temporarily," she explained, "but not permanently. The entity in your house is very old. It exists primarily in a place adjacent to our reality, but can manifest here when certain conditions are met." "Can it be destroyed?" I asked. "Not destroyed, no. but it can be bound again more securely, sent back to its own reality and the doorway sealed. It would require a ritual at the site where it's attempting to fully manifest, the chamber beneath your house. She took my right wrist, revealing a faint discoloration in the shape of long, thin fingers where the entity had grabbed me. It's chosen you as its next primary food source, Agnes said softly. It marks a target, creates a connection, then slowly drains them over time, feeding on their fear. That night, we descended into the underground chamber together. Agnes drew a complex pattern in the center of the room, lit candles at specific points, and began the ritual. As we chanted, the shadow in the corner grew, solidifying into that tall, thin figure with too many joints and a constantly shifting face. It reached for me with impossibly long fingers. You cannot bind us again. We have grown too strong. Agnes shouted a command, and I joined my voice with hers. A pendant she had given me flared with blue-white light against my chest. The entity screamed, a sound that existed simultaneously in my mind and in the physical air. Agnes made a swift cut across my marked wrist, not deep, but enough to draw blood. She caught the drops in a small stone bowl filled with liquid, then flung the mixture at the entity. It struck with a sound like a thunderclap. The entity convulsed, its form collapsing inward like smoke being sucked into an invisible vacuum. The very air seemed to tear open behind it, revealing a glimpse of somewhere else, a place of impossible angles and dimensions. The entity was pulled backward into that space, its scream fading as the tire sealed itself with a final flash of light. "Is it gone?" I asked. "Bound," Agnes corrected. "Sealed away more securely than before. It will take centuries for it to gather enough strength to test these bindings." In the hallway, Agnes pressed her hand against the hidden door. It swung shut with a decisive click, the seam between it and the surrounding paneling vanishing completely. "It's sealed," she said, "though I would suggest having a contractor wall over this section entirely, just to be safe. I've lived in the house on Maple Street for nearly a year now. The renovation is complete, the hidden door permanently concealed behind new drywall. I visit Agnes regularly, learning about the history of the watchers at the threshold. Sometimes, in the deepest hours of night, I still wake at exactly 3:17 a.m., heart pounding, certain I've heard footsteps or whispers. In those moments, I reach for the pendant Agnes gave me and remind myself that some doors, once properly closed, can stay that way. But I wonder, in the silent darkness of houses across America, how many others lie awake, listening to sounds they can't explain? How many other doors remain hidden, waiting to be discovered? And how many ancient, hungry things wait patiently behind them, whispering names in the darkness? If you're listening to this as you fall asleep tonight, I have just one piece of advice. If you find a hidden door in your home, think very carefully before you open it. And if you hear something whisper your name from behind it, run, don't look back, and find your nearest watcher, because now I know the truth that most people never learn. We are not alone in this world. The spaces between reality are thinner than we think, and sometimes what lives in those spaces finds its way through. Sweet dreams, my friends. And if you enjoyed this true account of my experience, please like, comment, and subscribe below. Let me know in the comments if you've ever experienced anything similar in your home. I read every comment, and who knows, your story might help identify another location where the watchers are needed. Just remember, be careful what doors you open and what names you speak in the dark. Story number 3. Have you ever felt like you're being watched? That prickling sensation on the back of your neck when you're all alone. The feeling that something is just not right. I never believed in the supernatural before that night by Miller's Creek. But now I can't stop looking over my shoulder, especially when I hear the sound of a woman weeping in the darkness. If you felt this too, leave a comment below. I need to know I'm not alone in this experience, and if you want to protect yourself from what I encountered, you'll want to hear my entire story. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss the warnings hidden in these tales. Trust me, some legends are better left undisturbed. And now, the story begins. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip. Just me, my best friend Ellie, her boyfriend Mike, and my brother Jason. We were celebrating the end of our junior year at the University of Texas with a weekend getaway to Miller's Creek, a small wooded area about 2 hours outside of Austin. The kind of place where cell service is spotty at best, and where local legends still hold power. We'd been planning this trip for weeks, coordinating our schedules around finals and part-time jobs. I'd been looking forward to disconnecting from reality after a particularly grueling semester. Just some hiking, swimming, and sitting around a campfire with cold beers and ghost stories. Nothing extreme. "Jess, did you remember to pack the portable charger?" Jason called from the garage as I finished loading my backpack into his Jeep. My brother was always the practical one, always thinking ahead. "Yeah, it's in the side pocket," I replied, checking my phone one last time before we lost service. A quick scroll through Instagram, a text to Mom promising we'd be careful. The usual. The drive was scenic. Texas hill country stretching out beyond the highway. Rolling green hills and wildflowers painting the landscape. We had the windows down, country music blasting from the speakers as Ellie and Mike cuddled in the back seat, singing along to their favorite songs. We stopped at a small gas station on the outskirts of a town called Riverdale for supplies, the kind of place with a single flashing light and a handwritten sign advertising the best beef jerky in Texas. The elderly cashier eyed us suspiciously as we loaded up on chips, marshmallows, and beer. Typical college kids heading into the wilderness. "Y'all camping out at Miller's Creek?" he asked, his weathered face creasing into a frown as he scanned our items. "Yes, sir," Jason replied with his usual politeness. Always the charmer. "Heard the fishing's good this time of year." The cashier paused, his hand hovering over the register. "You might want to reconsider. Pick another spot." His voice had dropped to almost a whisper. Mike laughed from behind us. "Let me guess, it's haunted." He made exaggerated ghost noises that made Ellie giggle. But the old man didn't smile. "It's the anniversary. She's always more active around now." "She?" I asked, feeling a slight chill despite the warm spring air. "La Llorona, the weeping woman." He spoke the name with such reverence that it silenced even Mike's laughter. "They say she drowned her children in that creek after her husband left her. Now she wanders the water's edge, crying for her lost babies, and taking any who come too close after dark." A heavy silence fell over our group, the only sound the buzz of the fluorescent lights above. "That's just a story to keep kids from swimming alone," Jason finally said with a nervous laugh. But I noticed he added extra batteries to our purchase. As we left, the cashier called after us. "Stay away from the water at night, and if you hear a woman crying, run the other way." We laughed it off as we piled back into the Jeep, chalking it up to small-town superstition and an old man trying to scare some city kids. But I couldn't shake the way his eyes had locked with mine, as if he knew something terrible was coming. "Dude was totally messing with us," Mike said, cracking open a soda as Jason pulled back onto the highway. "Every small town has some creepy legend to make themselves seem interesting." "I don't know. I've actually heard of La Llorona before," Ellie said thoughtfully, twisting her long blonde hair around her finger the way she always did when she was thinking. "My abuela used to tell me about her when I was little. Said she'd come for me if I played near water alone. See? It's just something parents tell their kids to keep them safe," Jason reasoned as he turned onto the unmarked road that would lead us to our campsite. Like the boogeyman or stranger danger, but something about the legend lingered in my mind as we drove deeper into the woods, the road becoming rougher as civilization fell away behind us, trees crowding close to the narrow dirt path. branches scraping against the sides of the Jeep like skeletal fingers. I told myself it was just the power of suggestion, that the old man had simply gotten into my head. Yet, as we finally arrived at Miller's Creek and I caught my first glimpse of the water, dark and still beneath the afternoon sun, I couldn't help but wonder what it would look like after nightfall, when the darkness came and the only sounds would be the wind in the trees and the gentle rush of water over stones. "Earth to Jess!" Jason snapped his fingers in front of my face, pulling me from my thoughts. "You gonna help set up the tents, or just stand there daydreaming all day?" I forced a smile, pushing away the unease that had settled over me. Sorry, just taking in the view. And what a view it was. The campsite was nestled in a small clearing about 20 yards from the creek, surrounded by tall pine trees that swayed gently in the breeze. The water glittered invitingly in the sunlight, clear enough to see the smooth stones at the bottom near the shore. As we set up our camp, hammering tent stakes into the soft earth and gathering wood for the fire, the cashier's warning seemed increasingly ridiculous. This place was peaceful, beautiful even. What harm could possibly come from a silly ghost story? If only we had listened. If only we had chosen another spot, or at least stayed away from the water after dark. But we were young and foolish, and so certain that legends were just stories. We couldn't have known what waited for us in the darkness, or the terrible price we would pay for our disbelief. The afternoon passed pleasantly enough. We hiked along the creek, taking photos for Instagram and skipping stones across the water's surface. Jason caught 2 decent-sized bass that we cooked over the fire for dinner, along with the obligatory hot dogs and s'mores. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, we gathered around the campfire with our beers. The flames painted our faces in flickering orange light as darkness crept in around us, the sounds of the forest changing with the coming night. "So," Mike said with an exaggerated wiggle of his eyebrows, "who wants to tell the first ghost story?" Ellie groaned, shoving him playfully. "After that creepy old guy at the gas station? No thanks." "Oh, come on," he insisted, taking a long swig of his beer. "That's what camping is all about, scaring each other with stories we don't really believe." Jason tossed another log onto the fire, sending sparks spiraling up toward the star-strewn sky. "Actually, I did some research on La Llorona while you guys were swimming earlier." I raised an eyebrow, surprised. My practical brother wasn't usually one for supernatural fascination. "Seriously?" He shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. I had a signal for a few minutes. Got curious. "And?" Mike prompted, leaning forward. "And it's actually a pretty common legend across the Southwest and Mexico. Different versions, but the core story is the same." Jason's voice took on the quality it always did when he was sharing something he found interesting. Slightly faster, more animated. A woman drowns her children after being abandoned by their father. Then, overcome with grief and remorse, she drowns herself. Now she's cursed to wander near bodies of water, searching for her children, or for replacements. "Replacements?" Ellie asked, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warmth of the fire. Jason nodded solemnly. "In some versions, she drowns other children she finds, mistaking them for her own. In others, she takes anyone foolish enough to answer her cries." A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond our circle of light, making us all jump slightly. Then we laughed at ourselves, the tension breaking. "Well, good thing we're all adults here," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The darkness beyond our campfire suddenly seeming deeper, more watchful. "Although," Jason continued, his voice dropping lower, "this area does have an unusually high number of drowning accidents, especially around this time of year." "Okay, that's enough," Ellie said firmly, her face pale in the firelight. "You're actually freaking me out now." Mike put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "It's just a story, babe. There's no such thing as ghosts." "Then why did you jump when that twig snapped?" she challenged, though she nestled closer to him. As they bickered playfully, I found my gaze drawn to the creek. Barely visible now, as a strip of deeper darkness at the edge of our campsite. Was it my imagination, or was there a mist beginning to rise from the water's surface, curling and twisting like ghostly fingers reaching for the shore? "I think I'm going to turn in," I announced suddenly, standing up and brushing off my jeans. I'm beat from all that hiking. "Party pooper," Mike called, but Ellie nodded understandingly. "I'm pretty tired too. Might join you soon." Jason checked his watch. "It's barely 10 o'clock, but whatever, more marshmallows for me." I crawled into the tent I was sharing with Ellie, zipping the door closed behind me. Through the thin fabric, I could still hear their voices, now lowered as they continued their conversation around the fire. I changed into my pajamas and slipped into my sleeping bag, the ground harder than I remembered from previous camping trips. Despite my claimed exhaustion, sleep eluded me. Every sound from the forest seemed amplified in the darkness. The rustle of leaves in the breeze, the occasional hoot of an owl, the distant splash of something entering the water. That last sound made me freeze, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. Just a fish, I told myself, or maybe a frog. Nothing supernatural about wildlife in a creek. I don't know how long I lay there, listening to the night sounds and my own breathing, before I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. But I do know what woke me. Crying. Soft at first, almost indistinguishable from the wind. A woman's weeping, filled with such profound sadness that it made my chest ache just to hear it. I sat up in my sleeping bag, suddenly wide awake. Ellie's sleeping bag was still empty beside me. She must still be by the fire with the others. I checked my phone. 12:37 a.m. The crying came again, slightly louder now, definitely coming from the direction of the creek. "Hello?" I called softly, not wanting to wake anyone if it was just Ellie having a moment alone. No response, just that heartbreaking weeping, rising and falling like waves. Against my better judgment, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The campfire had burned down to glowing embers, and the clearing was empty. No sign of Jason, Mike, or Ellie. "Guys?" I called, my voice sounding thin and fragile in the vast darkness. "This isn't funny." The crying continued, undisturbed by my presence, drawing me toward the water's edge as surely as if invisible hands were guiding me. A thick mist had indeed risen from the creek, shrouding the banks in a ghostly white veil that seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. As I approached the water, my bare feet silent on the damp earth. The weeping grew more distinct. I could make out words now, Spanish words spoken between gut-wrenching sobs. "Mis hijos, mis pobres hijos, ¿dónde están?" My 3 years of high school Spanish were rusty, but I understood enough. My children, my poor children. Where are they? Something told me to turn back, to run to the Jeep and drive away as fast as possible. But I couldn't. I had to know if this was some elaborate prank, or if the others were in trouble. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time as I reached the edge of the creek. "Is someone there? Do you need help?" The crying stopped abruptly, leaving an unnatural silence in its wake. Even the insects and frogs had gone quiet, as if holding their breath. That's when I saw her, standing in the middle of the creek where the water should have been waist deep, but she wasn't wet. Her long white dress billowed around her as if underwater, despite her standing above the surface. Her black hair hung in dripping strands around a face I couldn't quite see through the mist. But I could feel her eyes on me, watching, assessing. I stood frozen at the water's edge, unable to run, unable even to scream. My entire body trembled as she slowly began to move toward me, not walking but gliding across the water's surface, her arms outstretched. "Has visto a mis hijos?" she asked in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Have you seen my children?" My mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. This couldn't be real. I had to be dreaming. She was closer now, close enough that I could see her face through the mist. It might once have been beautiful, but now it was a horror of sunken cheeks and empty eye sockets that wept black tears. Her mouth stretched too wide as she spoke again. "You will do." I finally found my voice. A scream tearing from my throat as I stumbled backward, away from those reaching hands and that terrible face. My foot caught on a root, sending me crashing to the ground as the ghostly figure came ever closer, now emerging from the water onto the shore. "Jess, wake up!" I jerked awake with a gasp, my heart hammering against my ribs as I wildly looked around. I was in the tent, Ellie kneeling beside me with concern etched across her face. "You were having a nightmare," she said, her hand cool against my sweat-slicked forehead. "You were screaming in your sleep." I struggled to sit up, my breathing ragged as I tried to separate dream from reality. "What time is it?" "Just after 1, she replied, still watching me worriedly. "Are you okay? Was it about the story?" Before I could answer, a sound drifted through the night air, faint but unmistakable. A woman crying. Ellie's eyes widened as she heard it too. "What is that?" My blood turned to ice in my veins. "We need to wake the others. We need to leave, now." Ellie hesitated, head tilted as she listened to the distant weeping. It's probably just someone from another campsite. Maybe they're lost. I grabbed her arm, my fingers digging in harder than I intended. There is no other campsite. We haven't seen another person since we arrived. The color drained from her face as the realization sank in. We scrambled out of the tent into the clearing where the fire had died down to faintly glowing coals. The night air was cold now, much colder than it should have been for late spring in Texas, our breath fogging in front of our faces. "Jason, Mike," I called, trying to keep the panic from my voice, but they were nowhere to be seen. "They probably went to get more firewood," Ellie suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. "Or maybe to use the bathroom." The crying grew louder, more insistent, the sound of it raising goosebumps along my arms. It was coming from the creek. "Jason," I shouted, no longer caring if I sounded scared. "Mike, answer me!" Only the weeping responded, echoing through the trees like a terrible summons. "We should look for them," Ellie said, already moving toward the path that led to the water. I grabbed her hand, pulling her back. "No, that's exactly what she wants." "She?" Ellie stared at me. "Jess, you don't actually believe." "I don't know what I believe anymore." I cut her off, my voice shaking. "But I'm not going near that water. And neither should you." A twig snapped behind us. We whirled around to see a figure emerging from the tree line. I nearly collapsed with relief when I recognized Jason's familiar outline. "Where have you guys been?" he demanded, his voice tight with concern. I woke up, and everyone was gone. "We were looking for you," Ellie exclaimed. "Where's Mike?" Jason's face fell. "He's not with you." A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. "When did you last see him?" "About an hour ago. He said he was going to the creek to wash up before bed." Jason ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I recognized from childhood. I must have fallen asleep waiting for him to come back. The crying stopped suddenly, the abrupt silence somehow more terrifying than the weeping had been. "We need to find him," Ellie said, panic edging into her voice as she grabbed the flashlight from beside the fire pit. "He could have slipped and hurt himself." Part of me wanted to suggest we get in the Jeep and drive away, leave Mike to whatever fate had befallen him. But I couldn't do that, not to my friend, not to Ellie. "Stay together," I said firmly. "No matter what, we stay together." Jason nodded grimly, retrieving his own flashlight from his tent. The three of us moved hesitantly toward the creek path, our lights cutting weak swaths through the unnatural mist that had begun to curl around our ankles. The path to the creek seemed longer than it had during daylight, twisted somehow, as if the very landscape had shifted while we slept. The trees loomed closer, branches reaching down like gnarled hands, the undergrowth thicker and more tangled. "Mike!" Ellie called, her voice tight with worry. "Mike, answer me!" Only silence greeted us. Even the forest creatures had gone quiet, as if holding their breath. When we finally reached the creek, the mist was so thick we could barely see the water, just a dark ribbon cutting through the ghostly white fog. Our flashlight beams seemed to stop short, absorbed by the unnatural vapor. "I don't like this," Jason muttered, staying close to my side. "Something feels wrong." "Mike," Ellie called again, moving closer to the water's edge than I was comfortable with. "Please, baby, this isn't funny." "Ellie, don't go near the—" I began, but my warning died in my throat as a figure emerged from the mist on the far side of the creek. For one hopeful moment, I thought it was Mike. But as our flashlight beams illuminated the silhouette, my heart sank. It was a woman, standing perfectly still in the middle of the creek, her white dress billowing around her despite the lack of wind. "Hello?" Jason called cautiously. "Ma'am, are you okay? Are you lost?" The figure remained motionless, her face obscured by long dark hair that hung like seaweed around her head. "Oh, God," Ellie whispered beside me. "It's her, isn't it? La Llorona." As if triggered by the name, the woman's head snapped up, revealing a face that made me bite back a scream. Her eyes were empty black holes, her mouth a gaping maw of darkness that stretched too wide across her pale face. "Donde esta?" she asked, her voice somehow both directly in front of us and whispering in our ears simultaneously. "Donde está mi hijo?" "We don't know where your son is," I said, surprised I could speak at all past the terror constricting my throat. "We're looking for our friend." She began to move toward us, not walking but gliding across the water's surface, her movements jerky and unnatural like a puppet controlled by unseen strings. "Run!" Jason shouted, grabbing both our arms and pulling us back from the creek's edge. We turned to flee, but the fog had grown thicker behind us, obscuring the path back to camp. We stumbled forward blindly, branches clawing at our clothes and skin, the ground treacherous beneath our feet. "I can't see the trail," Ellie cried, her flashlight beam swallowed by the mist. "Just keep moving," Jason urged, still gripping our arms tightly. "Away from the water." A splash sounded behind us, followed by the sound of wet footsteps pursing through the underbrush. She was following us, hunting us through the fog. "Miss Hijos," she called, her voice somehow childlike now, playful and terrifying. "Come back to Mother." We ran faster, our lungs burning, terror lending speed to our feet. But the mist seemed to be hurting us, turning us in circles until I no longer knew which direction would lead us back to camp and which would lead us deeper into the woods. "Wait!" Ellie gasped suddenly, pulling free of Jason's grip and stopping short. "Listen!" Through the sound of our own ragged breathing, I heard it, a faint call that made my heart leap with hope. "Hello? Is someone there? Help!" "That's Mike!" Ellie cried, already turning toward the voice. "Ellie, no!" I lunged for her, but she was already pushing through the fog, following the sound of her boyfriend's voice. "It's not him!" Jason shouted after her. "It's a trick!" But Ellie was beyond hearing, beyond reason, her only thought to reach the person she loved. We had no choice but to follow, plunging back into the mist after her. "Ellie, wait!" I called, branches whipping across my face as I ran. "Please!" Her flashlight bobbed ahead of us, a distant beacon in the fog that moved with unnatural speed, as if she were being pulled along by an unseen force. When we finally caught up to her, my heart nearly stopped. We were back at the creek, in a spot I didn't recognize, where the banks were steep and muddy and the water ran deep and black. Ellie stood at the very edge. Her flashlight beam trained on the water where something floated just beneath the surface, something that looked horribly like a human form. "Mike?" she whispered, reaching toward the water. "Don't touch it," Jason bellowed, lunging forward to grab her. But he was too late. As Ellie's fingers brushed the surface of the creek, the water erupted upward, pale hands shooting out to grasp her wrists. She barely had time to scream before she was yanked forward, disappearing beneath the dark surface with barely a splash. "Ellie!" I screamed, rushing to the edge only to be held back by Jason's iron grip. "Jess, no! She'll take you too!" The surface of the creek went still, unnaturally calm as if nothing had disturbed it. No sign of Ellie or whatever had pulled her under. "We have to help her!" I fought against my brother's hold, tears streaming down my face. "She's gone, Jess," he said, his voice breaking. "We have to get out of here. We have to get help." A soft laugh echoed across the water, feminine and chilling. The mist began to part, revealing the woman in white standing on the opposite bank. But she wasn't alone anymore. Behind her stood two figures, their features indistinct in the fog, but I recognized Ellie's blonde hair and Mike's broad shoulders. They stood unnaturally still, water streaming from their clothes, their eyes reflecting the moonlight like animals caught in headlights. "Mis nuevos hijos," La Llorona said with terrible fondness, stroking Ellie's wet hair with skeletal fingers. "My new children." "Let them go," I screamed, my voice breaking with desperation. The ghostly woman tilted her head, studying me with those empty eye sockets. "Vienes a unirte a ellos?" she asked softly. "Will you join them?" She extended one pale hand toward me, an invitation. "Run," Jason whispered urgently in my ear. "On 3, run back toward camp. Don't stop, don't look back." "I can't leave them," I protested weakly, unable to tear my eyes from my friend's vacant expressions. "They're already gone," he insisted. 1, 2, 3. He shoved me hard away from the creek, and I ran. Branches tore at my clothes and skin. Roots threatened to trip me with every step, but I ran as if my life depended on it, because it did. Behind me, I heard Jason shout once, a sound cut terribly short by a splash. I wanted to turn back to help my brother, but pure survival instinct kept me moving forward, tears blinding me as I crashed through the underbrush. The mist seemed thinner now, or perhaps my terror had given me clarity, because suddenly I burst into our campsite, the tents still standing, the Jeep parked where we'd left it. Without hesitation, I lunged for the vehicle, fumbling for the keys Jason always left in the center console for emergencies. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. But finally, the engine roared to life. As I threw the Jeep into reverse, my headlights illuminated the edge of the clearing, where 4 figures now stood watching me. La Llorona, in her sodden white dress, flanked by my brother and friends, all dripping wet, all staring with the same empty expressions. I slammed my foot on the gas, the Jeep's tires spinning in the dirt before finding purchase, carrying me away from that cursed place as fast as the vehicle could go. I drove without stopping until the sun began to rise, putting as much distance between myself and Miller's Creek as possible. The rational part of my mind tried to make sense of what had happened, to find some explanation that didn't involve vengeful ghosts and supernatural drownings. Maybe we'd all eaten something that caused hallucinations. Maybe I'd fallen and hit my head. Maybe this was all an elaborate prank that had gone too far. But I knew the truth, as impossible as it seemed. I had seen La Llorona, had watched her take my friends, my brother, and some part of me knew they were still there, trapped by the creek, new children for a mother who had lost her own. When I finally reached civilization, a small diner on the outskirts of Riverdale, I pulled over and tried to collect myself. My clothes were torn and muddy. Scratches covered my arms and face from running through the woods, and my eyes were swollen from crying. I must have looked like a madwoman as I stumbled into the diner, the few early morning customers turning to stare as I approached the counter. "I need to use your phone," I told the startled waitress. "There's been an accident. My friends." She must have seen something in my face that convinced her of my sincerity, because she immediately led me to the office in the back and pointed to an old landline phone. I called 911, trying to explain what had happened without sounding completely insane. I told them about the camping trip, about my friends going missing near the creek. I left out the ghostly woman and the impossible things I had seen. The sheriff arrived within 20 minutes, a weathered man with kind eyes who listened patiently as I recounted my edited version of events. "We'll send out a search party right away," he assured me, his hand gentle on my shoulder. "Miller's Creek can be dangerous, especially after dark. The currents are unpredictable." "You don't understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't the current. It was her." His expression shifted, something like recognition flickering across his face. "Her? La Llorona," I whispered, half expecting him to laugh or call for a psychological evaluation. But he just nodded solemnly. "You're not the first to see her, especially this time of year." A chill ran down my spine. "You believe me? Let's just say I've been sheriff in these parts for 30 years, and some things can't be explained away." He sighed heavily. "But we'll do everything we can to find your friends." They never did, not really. The search parties found our campsite, our abandoned tents and equipment. They found footprints leading to the creek, but no sign of Jason, Ellie, or Mike. The official report listed them as presumed drowned, victims of a tragic accident. Their bodies were never recovered, despite weeks of searching. I moved away from Texas after that. Couldn't bear to stay where the memories were so fresh, where every creek and river reminded me of what I had lost. I transferred to a college in Arizona, as far from water as I could manage. But distance hasn't helped, not really, because no matter where I go, I still hear her sometimes, in the sound of running water or during rainstorms. That soft, heartbroken weeping that turns my blood to ice. And sometimes, in my dreams, I see them. Jason, Ellie, and Mike standing in water up to their waists, their eyes empty, their skin pale and bloated. They call to me, ask me to join them, tell me the water isn't so cold once you get used to it. I wake from these dreams drenched in sweat, my throat raw from screaming. It's been 3 years since that night at Miller's Creek, but the memories haven't faded. If anything, they've grown sharper, more insistent, as if they're trying to tell me something I missed. Last week, I received a letter. No return address, just my name, scrawled in handwriting I recognized immediately as Jason's. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words written in what looked like mud. "She won't stop with us." I don't know what it means, or how it found its way to me. The logical part of my brain says it's impossible, that someone is playing a cruel joke. But I know better. I've started researching La Llorona more thoroughly now, trying to understand what happened that night, and why I alone was spared. Every culture has similar legends. Vengeful female spirits associated with water and drowned children. The details change, but the core remains the same. A warning. Stay away from the water after dark. Don't answer if you hear weeping. And never, ever look into the eyes of La Llorona. I don't know why I'm sharing this story with you now. Perhaps as a warning. Perhaps in hope that someone else has encountered her and survived to tell the tale. Perhaps simply because keeping it inside is slowly driving me mad. But I do know this. Legends exist for a reason. They're not just stories we tell around campfires to frighten each other. They're warnings passed down through generations about very real dangers. So, if you're camping near water, and you hear a woman crying in the night, don't investigate, don't try to help, just run. Run as far and as fast as you can, because she's still out there, still searching for her children, or for replacements, and something tells me she hasn't forgotten about me. Sometimes, when it rains, I swear I can hear her outside my window, crying for her lost children, and waiting for me to finally join my friends. I wonder how much longer I can resist her call. If you've ever encountered something similar, or if you know more about La Llorona than what I've shared, please leave a comment below. Subscribe to hear more warnings about the things that lurk in the darkness, the legends that are more than just stories. Because knowledge is our only defense against the horrors that wait in the dark. And remember, if you hear weeping near the water, run the other way, before it's too late. Story number 4. Hey there, fellow night owls and thrill seekers. Before we dive into tonight's story, I want to thank you for joining me again in the dark corners of your imagination. If this is your first time here, welcome to the shadows. Tonight's tale explores the thin line between rational fear and consuming madness, a journey I think many of us walk more often than we'd like to admit. Have you ever noticed how your mind plays tricks on you at 3 a.m.? How the most ordinary sounds become sinister? How everyday objects cast menacing shadows? What if I told you that sometimes those fears aren't just in your head, that sometimes the darkness is watching back? If you enjoy getting lost in psychological horror that lingers long after the story ends, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your comments fuel these nocturnal narratives, so drop your thoughts, theories, or your own encounters with irrational fear below. Now, dim your lights, get comfortable, and let's begin our descent into madness. The story begins now. The first thing Dr. Sarah Mitchell noticed about her new office was the silence. Too perfect, too complete, like the building itself was holding its breath. She set her cardboard box of belongings on the mahogany desk, admiring how sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the converted Victorian home that now housed her psychology practice. After years working in the sterile fluorescent glare of Boston General Hospital, she'd finally taken the plunge private practice in the small Massachusetts town of Millfield. "This is it," she whispered to herself. "A fresh start." A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Mitchell, a woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, peeked in. "I'm Agnes, receptionist for the whole building. Just wanted to welcome you to the Thomas Cole House." Sarah smiled. "Thanks, Agnes. It's gorgeous. I can't believe how affordable the rent is for such a beautiful historic property." Something flickered across Agnes's face. "Well, location matters in real estate. Being across from Millfield Cemetery keeps the price reasonable." She hesitated. "Most tenants don't stay more than a year or two. They say it gets too quiet." Sarah laughed. After a decade in a busy hospital, quiet sounds perfect. Agnes nodded, unconvinced. "Well, Dr. Lewis is next door if you need anything. He's been here longest, almost 3 years now." "I'll be fine," Sarah assured her. "But thanks." After Agnes left, Sarah unpacked her credentials, psychology texts, and finally, a small framed photo of her sister Emma, forever frozen at 26. Sarah touched the glass gently. "I'm doing it, Em, just like we planned." The wall clock ticked steadily as shadows lengthened across her office. Sarah arranged her furniture, hung her diplomas, and typed up notes for tomorrow's first patient consultations. By 6 o'clock, her eyelids grew heavy. She'd been up since 4 a.m., too anxious about the move to sleep. Standing to stretch, she noticed her office door was ajar. She distinctly remembered closing it after Agnes left. A draft, obviously. The building was over 100 years old. Still, she pushed the door firmly shut this time. Returning to her desk, Sarah froze. The framed photo of Emma now faced the wall. Sarah felt her heartbeat quicken. Had she accidentally turned it while organizing? She must have. Yet she couldn't shake the sensation of being observed. "Hello?" Her voice sounded small in the large office. The building's ancient heating system creaked in response, just settling noises, she told herself. Old buildings made sounds. That was normal. Normal. Sarah almost laughed at herself. As a psychologist specializing in anxiety disorders, she knew better than anyone how the mind manufactured threats from benign stimuli. How ironic to fall victim to the very cognitive distortions she helped patients overcome. She gathered her belongings, double-checked that she had her keys, and headed for the door. As she reached for the handle, a whisper so faint she almost missed it seemed to come from behind her. "Stay!" Sarah whirled around. The empty office stared back at her. Just the wind outside, or pipes contracting. She hurried out, locking the door firmly behind her. In the hallway, a tall man with salt and pepper hair was locking his own office door. "You must be Dr. Mitchell," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Richard Lewis, psychotherapist next door." "Nice to meet you," Sarah replied, grateful for human company. "First day jitters, I guess. This place is so quiet it's almost unnerving." Dr. Lewis's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You'll get used to it, or you won't." He glanced at his watch. "I wouldn't stay after dark if I were you. The old wiring makes the lights unreliable." Before Sarah could respond, he was heading down the stairs, leather briefcase swinging at his side. That night, in her new apartment, 3 miles from the office, Sarah dreamed of corridors that stretched and contracted like breathing lungs, of whispers behind closed doors, and a woman who looked like Emma, standing at the end of a hallway, mouth open in a silent scream. She woke gasping at 3:17 a.m., sheets damp with sweat. "Just anxiety about the new job," she told the darkness, but she left the bedside lamp on for the rest of the night. By her 3rd week at the Thomas Cole House, Sarah had almost convinced herself the strange incidents were products of stress and an overactive imagination. Almost. Her practice was taking off. The small town desperately needed mental health services, and her appointment book filled quickly. Between sessions, she found herself listening for something. Footsteps when no one was there. Whispers in empty rooms. The sensation of being watched. On Wednesday afternoon, Sarah was reviewing notes when her office temperature plummeted. October in Massachusetts meant chilly weather, but this was different. A sudden, localized cold that made her breath visible. Her desk lamp flickered once, twice, then stabilized. On her bookshelf, a heavy psychology textbook thumped to the floor, opening to a chapter on dissociative disorders. Sarah stared at it, heart hammering. No windows were open. No air vents pointed in that direction. A knock at her door made her jump. "Come in," she called, hating the tremor in her voice. Agnes entered with a steaming mug. "Thought you might need coffee. You've been seeing patients back to back all day." "Thanks," Sarah said, trying to appear normal as she accepted the mug. "Agnes, has anyone ever reported anything unusual about this building?" The receptionist's expression turned guarded. "Unusual how?" "I don't know. Cold spots, things moving, strange noises." Agnes set her jaw. "Dr. Mitchell, this is a professional building." "Of course." Sarah backpedaled. "I just wondered about the history. It's obviously very old." After a pause, Agnes sighed. "It was a private residence until 1954. The Cole family. Thomas was a doctor too, actually. General practitioner. After his wife died in childbirth, he became obsessed with his work. Some say unethically so." Sarah leaned forward, intrigued despite herself. What happened to him? Mental breakdown. He claimed his wife's spirit was trapped in the house, that she was trying to communicate through his patients. Agnes shrugged. He was institutionalized. The house passed through several owners before being converted to offices in the 80s. Sarah swallowed. "That's quite a story." "Just history now," Agnes said firmly. "Although," she hesitated, lowering her voice, "the previous tenant in your office, Dr. Weston, left rather suddenly. Claimed he kept finding his patient files rearranged. Started saying he could hear a woman crying through the walls." "Where did he go?" "Moved his practice to Vermont. Apparently he's doing quite well." Agnes straightened. "But that's just small-town gossip. These old buildings make noises. Floors creak. It's nothing." After Agnes left, Sarah found herself staring at the wall that separated her office from what had once been other rooms in the Cole family home. What had happened in this space? What residual emotions might linger? As a scientist, Sarah didn't believe in ghosts. But as a psychologist, she understood how environments could become psychologically charged. Perhaps there was a rational explanation. Infrasound from old pipes causing anxiety and visual hallucinations, or toxic mold affecting cognition. That evening, Sarah stayed late to research the building's history. Online records were sparse, but she found a digitized newspaper from 1953. Local physician claims deceased wife communicates through patients. Dr. Thomas Cole, respected Millfield doctor, has been temporarily relieved of duties following disturbing reports. Several female patients claim Cole subjected them to experimental hypnosis techniques. Cole insists his recently deceased wife, Margaret, is attempting to come through during these sessions. Sarah shivered, glancing at her office door. For an instant, she thought she saw a shadow pass underneath it, as if someone stood just outside. Then her computer screen went black. "No, no, no," she muttered, frantically pressing keys. Nothing happened. The power was out, yet overhead lights remained on. The surface of her desk began to vibrate subtly, pens rolling toward the edge. A high-pitched whine filled the air just at the threshold of hearing. Sarah's ears popped as if the air pressure had suddenly changed. On the wall opposite her desk, a dark stain began to spread, elongating into what looked horribly like a reaching hand. Sarah grabbed her bag and ran, not stopping until she reached her car. As she fumbled with her keys, she glanced up at her office window. A woman's silhouette stood there watching. But Sarah's office was on the second floor, and the shadow was too tall, too distorted to be human. She drove home well above the speed limit, convinced something was following her. "You've been sleeping poorly," Dr. Lewis observed the next morning when they met in the building's small kitchen. Nightmares? Sarah hadn't told anyone about her experiences, fearing she'd sound unstable. But Lewis had a calming presence, and after 3 weeks of escalating phenomena, she needed perspective. "Richard," she said quietly, "have you ever experienced anything strange in this building?" He stirred his coffee methodically. "Define strange. Things moving, unexplained sounds, feeling watched." Lewis's expression remained neutral, the practiced look of a therapist withholding judgment. "Old buildings have personalities, Sarah. They absorb energies. Not supernatural necessarily, but psychological imprints. That's not an answer." "No," he admitted. "But consider this professionally. What if the building itself is a kind of Rorschach test? We project our fears, our unresolved issues onto its ambiguous stimuli." Sarah frowned. Are you suggesting I'm hallucinating? I'm suggesting that stress, transition, and isolation can affect perception. You recently moved, started a new practice, and from our conversations I gather you're still processing grief. Her sister's face flashed in her mind. Emma's death was 5 years ago. Yet, you took this job because of her, following the plan you made together. His voice softened. Grief doesn't follow a timeline, Sarah, and unresolved trauma has a way of manifesting. Before she could respond, Agnes appeared. Dr. Mitchell, your 9 o'clock canceled, but you have someone waiting who's hoping for a consultation. Says it's urgent. Sarah checked her watch. I can fit them in, send them up in 5 minutes. Back in her office, Sarah straightened her desk, trying to focus. Lewis wasn't wrong. She had been under stress, and Emma's death remained a tender wound. Could that explain what she was experiencing? A tentative knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she called. The woman who entered looked to be in her mid-30s, with auburn hair and pale skin. She wore a vintage-style dress that seemed oddly formal for a therapy appointment. Dr. Mitchell, I'm Margaret. I was hoping you could help me. Sarah gestured to the chair across from her desk. Please, sit down. What brings you in today, Margaret? The woman perched on the edge of the chair, hands folded in her lap. I'm having trouble being heard. That's very common, Sarah said. Many people feel their needs or feelings go unrecognized. No, Margaret interrupted. I mean literally heard. I speak, but it's like no one hears me, or they hear something else entirely. Sarah nodded, jotting notes. Potential auditory processing disorder? Delusion of reference? When did this start? After... Margaret paused, her form seeming to waver slightly, like heat rising from pavement. After I died. Sarah's pen froze mid-word. She looked up slowly. Margaret's eyes had changed, now dark, hollow, with a strange luminescence behind them. He couldn't let me go. Thomas, my husband. He kept trying to bring me back through his patience. Her voice distorted, overlapping with itself like a damaged recording. But I just want to rest. Why won't he let me rest? The temperature in the office plunged. Sarah's breath clouded before her. Who referred you to me? Margaret smiled, her teeth suddenly too sharp, too numerous. You moved into my home, doctor, into his office where he tried to force me to return, where those women suffered because of his obsession. Sarah reached for her phone, but it skittered away across the desk as if pulled by invisible fingers. I'm not really here, Margaret whispered, though her voice seemed to come from the walls themselves. And soon you won't be either, not fully. That's what happens in this room. The boundary thins. Reality slips. Sarah stood on shaking legs, backing toward the door. You're not real. You're a hallucination, a manifestation of anxiety, or did my husband tell himself the same thing? Margaret's form flickered, momentarily revealing something beneath the human appearance, something dark and fragmented. He thought he was sane too, until he wasn't. She leaned forward. Tell me, doctor, how clearly can you distinguish between fear and madness? Between what's real and what your mind creates to protect itself? Sarah grasped the doorknob, but it was ice cold, burning her palm. She yanked her hand away with a cry. You feel that pain, Margaret said softly. Is that a hallucination too? The woman's form was dissolving now, black smoke curling from her edges. The smoke spread, coiling around furniture, climbing walls, reaching for Sarah. What do you want? Sarah gasped. Margaret's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. What every prisoner wants, doctor. Freedom, or company in my cell. Sarah fumbled with the door, finally wrenching it open and stumbling into the hallway. She ran for the stairs, past startled Agnes, out into the crisp autumn air. Only when she reached her car did she realize she'd left everything behind. Phone, purse, keys. As her breathing slowed, rational thought returned. She'd had a panic attack, possibly a stress-induced hallucination. She needed rest, maybe medication. But when she looked back at her office window, Margaret stood there, watching. And this time, Sarah was certain it wasn't a hallucination, because Agnes was outside now too, staring up at the same window with an expression of absolute horror. "Tell me again what you saw," Detective Hansen said, his notepad open but empty. Sarah sat in the Millfield police station, hands wrapped around a foam cup of bitter coffee. 2 days had passed since her encounter with Margaret. 2 days of hotel rooms and sleepless nights. A woman who called herself Margaret Cole. Auburn hair, pale skin, vintage clothing. She claimed to be the deceased wife of the doctor who originally owned the building. Hansen's expression remained professionally neutral. "And you believe this woman was a ghost?" Put that way, it sounded absurd. "I'm not sure what I believe, but Agnes saw her too, at the window. Miss Wilkins states she saw something at the window, not specifically a woman." He flipped through his notes. "And Dr. Lewis reports you've been under considerable stress." Sarah felt a flare of betrayal. "You spoke with Richard?" "Standard procedure when investigating potential break-ins. He mentioned you'd been asking about the building's history, seemed preoccupied with strange occurrences. This wasn't a break-in," Sarah insisted. "I let her in. We spoke. She was there." The detective sighed. "Dr. Mitchell, we searched the building thoroughly. No signs of forced entry. No evidence anyone besides staff entered yesterday. No fingerprints except yours in your office. Check the security cameras." "We did. The exterior cameras show you arriving, then running out approximately 40 minutes later. No one else entered your office." Sarah's mind raced. "The interior cameras don't include your private office, as you know. Patient confidentiality." Sarah slumped back. How could she explain what happened when she barely understood it herself? "Look," Hansen said, gentler now. "I'm not dismissing your experience, but from a law enforcement perspective, there's no crime to investigate. Maybe take some time off? Speak with a colleague professionally?" By the time Sarah left the station, afternoon shadows stretched long across Millfield's historic downtown. She'd been avoiding the Thomas Cole house, but now found herself driving there, drawn by an urge she couldn't name. The parking lot was nearly empty, just Richard's BMW and Agnes's sensible Subaru. Sarah sat in her car, studying the Victorian's imposing facade. Upper windows reflected the setting sun like blazing eyes. Was Margaret watching even now? Sarah had spent her career helping people distinguish between objective reality and psychological projection. Now, those boundaries were dissolving for her too. If she couldn't trust her own perception, what remained? Her phone rang, startling her. Unknown number. "Hello? Dr. Mitchell." A man's voice, unfamiliar. "This is James Weston. Richard Lewis suggested I call you." Sarah straightened. "Dr. Weston? The previous tenant of my office?" "Yes." His voice was tight, controlled. "Richard mentioned you've been experiencing incidents in the building. You could say that." A long pause. "Have you seen her yet?" "Margaret?" Sarah's skin prickled. "Yesterday." "Then it's already starting. Listen carefully. The Cole house doesn't just have a history, it has a pattern. Every therapist who uses that office eventually experiences the same progression of events. Cold spots, moving objects, whispers. Then Margaret appears. What does she want? I spent months researching after I left. Thomas Cole didn't just lose his wife in childbirth. He was obsessed with spiritualism, with breaching the barrier between life and death. His experiments on patients were actually attempts to create conduits for Margaret's spirit." "That's impossible," Sarah said automatically. "Is it? Consider the nature of consciousness, Dr. Mitchell. Energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed. What if Cole actually succeeded? What if he created a tear in the normal order of things?" A place where the boundary between mind and reality, between life and death, becomes permeable. Sarah watched the sun sink lower, shadows deepening across the building. "Why didn't you warn me before I took the office?" "Would you have believed me?" Weston countered. "Besides, I tried to forget, to convince myself it was stress, hallucination. But it doesn't stop, Dr. Mitchell. She's persistent." "What happens next?" Sarah whispered. "You're already experiencing it, doubting your sanity, having others doubt you too. Soon you'll start losing time, finding yourself in places with no memory of how you got there. Margaret gets stronger, more present, and you begin to fade. What do I do? Leave immediately. Don't go back to that office. Don't." The line crackled with sudden static. Through the interference, Weston's voice became desperate. "She knows. She can hear us. She's—" The call dropped. Sarah stared at her phone, then at the building looming before her. As she watched, lights in her office window flicked on, though she knew no one should be there. Decision crystallizing, she stepped out of her car. She needed answers, needed to understand what was happening to her. If that meant confronting Margaret again, so be it. The building's front door opened with a familiar creak. Inside, the reception area was dark. Agnes apparently gone for the day. Sarah climbed the stairs slowly, each step bringing both dread and determination. Her office door stood slightly ajar, warm light spilling into the hallway. Sarah pushed it open. Richard Lewis sat at her desk, rifling through her patient files. "Richard, what are you doing?" He looked up, startled but not guilty. "Sarah, I thought you'd gone for the day." "Clearly." She stepped inside, noticing Emma's photo now faced the wall again. "Why are you going through my files?" Richard closed the folder he'd been examining. "Professional concern. After your episode yesterday, I wanted to ensure your patients had continuity of care. That's not your decision to make." Something felt wrong. The room's energy had shifted, heavier, charged. Richard studied her. "You spoke with Weston. He called me, yes. Said you gave him my number. I thought hearing from someone with similar experiences might help." Richard stood, moving toward her. "Help you understand what's actually happening." "Which is what, exactly?" "Your sister's death affected you deeply. You've never fully processed that grief. Now, in a high-stress transition period, in a building with a traumatic history that parallels your own loss, you're experiencing a dissociative episode." His explanation was perfectly rational, exactly what she might have told a patient in similar circumstances. Yet something in his tone rang false. "And Margaret? Is she a dissociative episode too?" A flicker of something fear crossed Richard's face. "Margaret isn't real, Sarah." Agnes saw her too. "Agnes has worked in this building for 30 years. She's absorbed every rumor, every ghost story." Sarah moved toward her desk, reclaiming her space. "I spoke with Margaret, Richard. She knew things about the building, about Thomas Cole's experiments, information available in local history books, which you've been researching." He sighed. "Sarah, as your colleague, I'm concerned. You're displaying classic symptoms of a psychotic break." The room temperature dropped suddenly. Behind Richard, the shadow on the wall began to elongate, stretching into a human silhouette. "Richard," Sarah said carefully, "don't turn around, but she's here." His expression hardened. "Stop this, Sarah. There's no one—" The shadow enveloped him, wrapping around his form like liquid darkness. Richard's eyes widened, body going rigid. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, layered with a woman's tones. "He knows I'm real. They all do. Thomas made sure of that." Sarah backed against the door. "Margaret?" Richard's body moved stiffly, like a puppet. The voice coming from his throat was not his own. "Thomas couldn't accept I was gone. He tried to force me back through his patients. thinning the veil between worlds until I could slip through, but I was never meant to return. What do you want from me? Sarah's hand found the doorknob. What Thomas wanted from his patients, a vessel, a way back. Richard's face contorted in anguish. But I don't want to return, I want to rest. And for that to happen, the tier must be sealed. How? Someone must take my place. Someone must willingly cross over. The amalgamation of Richard and Margaret moved closer. Every therapist who works in this room faces the same choice eventually. Stay and gradually lose yourself to madness, or sacrifice yourself to heal the rift. Sarah thought of Weston, who'd fled, of other therapists before him, who'd left within a year or two, and of Richard, who'd stayed the longest. You've been protecting the others, she realized. Taking the burden yourself. Richard's eyes cleared momentarily, his own voice breaking through. 3 years fighting her, keeping her contained. But I'm losing Sarah. I can't hold her back much longer. Margaret's voice returned, stronger. The choice is yours, Doctor. Join me in the space between worlds, or watch as I claim more victims. Already, your mind frays at the edges. How long before you can no longer distinguish between what's real and what isn't? Sarah thought of her patients, of Agnes, of future therapists who might occupy this office, and of Emma, her sister, who had died too young, whose memory she'd been trying to honor. If I agree, she said slowly, what happens to Richard? To the others who've been affected? They'll be free, the connection broken. And me? You'll exist where I exist now, neither here nor there, but the tier will be sealed. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering everything she'd worked for, everyone she'd hoped to help. Was she really considering this? Or was this final proof she'd already lost her grip on reality? How do I know this isn't delusion? That I'm not having a complete breakdown? Richard's body shuddered, and for a moment, Sarah saw Margaret superimposed over him, translucent, sorrowful, trapped. Faith, Margaret whispered. The same leap Thomas asked of his patients. The boundary between madness and transcendence has always been paper-thin. Outside, thunder rumbled as an autumn storm gathered. The lights flickered, shadows dancing across the walls. Sarah thought of Emma, of the plans they'd made that would now never be fulfilled, but also of the peace Emma had found in death. A peace Margaret had been denied. I'll do it, Sarah said quietly, but not for you or for Thomas, for those who deserve protection from what he created. Margaret's presence detached from Richard, who collapsed to the floor gasping. The dark energy coalesced, forming a doorway of shadow against the far wall. Step through, Margaret's voice echoed. Finish what Thomas started, seal the breach. Sarah moved forward, each step feeling both impossible and inevitable. At the threshold of darkness, she hesitated, looking back at her office, at the life she was abandoning. Is this real? She whispered. One last doubt. No answer came. Perhaps it didn't matter. Reality, after all, was only ever what we collectively agreed upon. And sometimes, healing required faith in things beyond rational explanation. Sarah stepped into the darkness. In her wake, the shadow doorway collapsed. The office temperature normalized, and the Thomas Cole house settled into peaceful silence for the first time in 70 years. So there you have it, friends. The line between fear and madness, between reality and perception, isn't as solid as we'd like to believe. Some say the Thomas Cole house stands empty now, the office space impossible to rent. Others claim to see a woman in the second-floor window on stormy nights. Not Margaret Cole, but someone else. Someone who made the ultimate sacrifice. What would you do if faced with Sarah's choice? Would you trust your rational mind or follow your intuition into the darkness? Let me know in the comments below. If this story kept you awake, wondering what shadows might be gathering in your own home, hit that subscribe button for more psychological horror that blurs the line between the rational and supernatural. Share with a friend who needs a delicious chill down their spine tonight. And remember, sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones that go bump in the night, but the doubts that whisper, "What if you can't trust your own mind?" Sleep tight if you can. I'll be back next week with another journey into the shadows we all carry within.